Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 60th day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Our chaplain today is Senator Blood. Please rise.
Friends, please join me in prayer. Righteous God, we thank you for who you are, and we bless you for providing every person here with the job they must do today. We pray that when dealing with difficult peers, that we remember to reflect on your word. The scripture says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" I pray for a better understanding of the fact that those who persecute us may have issues, but we also are not perfect. Let our approach today always be with a loving heart, and keep Romans 12:16 in mind, where we are told, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight." And so, Lord, sustain us with your grace and help us to better understand our weaknesses and our struggles. So together we can grow stronger. Together we can extend love to one another. And together we can leave the world a better place for all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
I recognize Senator Albright for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Thank you. I call to order the 60th day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections. Been a request for a roll call vote on acceptance of the journal.
There's been a request for a roll call vote on the acceptance of the journal. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Senator Dover. Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Not voting, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Senator Holleran. Not voting, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart. Voting yes. The vote is 40 yeas, no nays, Mr. President, to accept today's journal.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The journal is accepted. Do you have any messages, reports, or announcements?
I have none at this time, Mr. President.
Senator Breezy, you're recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Couple items. As a reminder, the vacant seat on the Performance Audit Committee created by Senator Geist's resignation will be filled by the Executive Board. Senators who are interested in being appointed to the position should send a letter or email to my office by noon today. In addition, any senator who is a co-sponsor of one of Senator Geist's bills who is interested in assuming primary sponsorship of the bill should communicate that fact to the clerk no later than noon today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ibach has some guests in the South Balcony. Kelsey Smith of Gothenburg, Nebraska, and C.J. Trapper. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. As a reminder to our guests in the balcony, pursuant to Rule 1, Section 11, the presiding officer has the discretion to empty the galleries in case of disturbance or disorderly conduct. While I don't anticipate exercising that authority, I want to remind all those observing the legislature that there will be no outbursts, including clapping, heckling, or cheering. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 626. First of all, I have a motion from Senator Hunt to indefinitely postpone LB 626 pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you are authorized to open on that motion.
Doesn't Senator Albright get to open on the bill?
Pursuant to the rule change, Senator Albright, you're recognized for a 10-minute open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, for the reminder. Good morning, colleagues and Nebraskans. I rise today in in a very privileged state to introduce LB 626. It's about one thing: protecting babies with beating hearts from elective abortion. Every parent remembers hearing their child's heartbeat for the first time. I know I do. These are moments that change all of us because we know what a heartbeat means. It's a universal sign of life. Abortion stops the beating heart. Under LB 626, before performing an abortion, a physician must perform an ultrasound to listen for a fetal heartbeat. If a heartbeat is detected, performing an abortion is unlawful, except in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. In addition to these exceptions, the Nebraska Heartbeat Act makes undeniably clear that pregnant women can always receive the care and treatment that they need. The bill clearly provides that treatment for ectopic pregnancy, miscarriage, and any emergency medical situation will remain unaffected. It also clearly provides that access to in vitro fertilization will remain unaffected as well. Nothing in LB 626 changes the standard of care for any pregnant woman who is facing a medical emergency, including in the rare and tragic cases where the baby and the mother must be separated to protect her life or health. Under this bill, doctors are free to exercise their medical judgment. In fact, LB 626 will make Nebraska the state with the friendliest pro-life law for doctors in the United States. There are no criminal penalties in this bill. Every other state that regulates abortion imposes criminal penalties for unlawful abortions. LB 626 gives no right to sue doctors who perform unlawful abortions. A right to sue is common in abortion laws in other states. Any abortionist who violates the Nebraska Heartbeat Act will have their medical license subject to discipline by the Director of Public Health in consultation with the board of their medical peers, like any other instance of unprofessional conduct, but no criminal or civil penalties. LB 626 gives physicians a right to be evaluated by their medical peers. Every other state puts a doctor in front of a judge and jury when accused of performing unlawful abortions. This bill does not do that. I want to talk specifically about medical emergencies and what happens if a mother's life is at risk. Opponents will claim that doctors won't know what to do and that they will delay care or women will be turned away. This is simply not true. Section 3 of the bill defines a medical emergency as any condition which in reasonable medical judgment so complicates the medical condition of the pregnant woman as to necessitate the termination of her pregnancy to avert her death, or for which a delay in terminating her pregnancy will create a serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of the major bodily function. The bill then defines reasonable medical judgment as a medical judgment that could be made by a reasonably prudent physician knowledgeable about the case and the treatment possibilities with respect to the medical conditions involved. Colleagues, this definition provides a broader and bigger safety net for the judgment of physicians than any pro-life law in the country. Someone would have to commit malpractice to fall outside of this definition. Most states say reasonable medical judgment is about whether there is a medical emergency, which means a judgment that would be made by a physician knowledgeable about the case and circumstances. LB 626 says that reasonable medical judgment, whether there is a medical emergency, means a judgment that could be made by a physician. Doctors will have complete freedom to exercise their medical judgment, and they don't have to wait. Again, the exception for performing an abortion in a medical emergency states that it is permissible to perform an abortion if a delay in terminating the pregnancy will create a serious risk of substantial or irreversible physical impairment of a bodily function. We know this works because we've already been doing this for 13 years without issue. Our 20-week law, which was passed in 2010 by Senator Mike Flood at the time, was virtually identical exception for medical emergencies. The only difference is that LB 626 is even friendlier and more differential to doctors than our current 20-week law. And that law works. Pregnant women have continued to receive appropriate medical care without any fear or confusion. No doctors have been prosecuted. Babies and moms are being protected. In Section 5, it addresses the exceptions for rape and incest, and the only requirement is that a physician certify in writing that the abortion was performed because of a sexual assault or incest, and they comply with the duties of the healthcare provider already required in state statute, specifically Section 28-902, which requires a doctor do one thing: give the woman her options. No police report is required, no arrest or conviction is required, and only that the doctor gives a victim her options to access help already required by law. LB 626 is also clear in Section 6 that no woman who obtains or attempts to obtain an abortion may be held liable in any way. This bill is right for Nebraska. It protects women, it protects doctors, and it protects babies with beating hearts. That's what this bill is about, and that's why several of our state's top maternal and fetal health specialists testified in support of this bill. Dr. Elaine Krause is a board-certified OBGYN and a maternal fetal specialist, medicine specialist in Lincoln. She stated in her testimony that LB 626 specifically empowers doctors to proceed with interventions, even direct abortions in the case of medical emergency. It furthermore enables women and their healthcare providers to make individualized decisions when challenged with pregnancy complications. My training has prepared me to provide excellent pregnancy care for both maternal and fetal patients, and LB 626 in no way compromises my ability to do that. She encourages us to vote it into law. Dr. Sean Kinney, a board-certified OBGYN maternal fetal and medicine specialist in Nebraska for 25 years, testified that there is no confusion over reasonable medical judgment. It's what doctors use every day. And LB 626 would not compromise a physician's ability to take care of women. Dr. Robert Bonebrake, also an OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist and the past chair of the Nebraska Maternal Morbidity and Mobility Review Team, estimated that he has cared for approximately 15,000 to 20,000 different women over 27 years as a maternal fetal specialist. Dr. Bonebrake stated that LB 626 lays out a clear standard for protecting the woman's life and health. Any physician providing best practices is safe under this framework, and that only doctors who have the reason for concern are those whose conduct is so far out of the mainstream, so indifferent to human life, that a well-informed physician could never have made the same decision. He finished by saying, "This is a very easy danger to avoid while providing comprehensive and appropriate medical care."
1 minute.
We'll hear a lot of arguments from our opponents today, but they are not based on what this bill actually does. At the end of the day, this is about elective abortions. And if we will protect the lives of baby girls and boys in our state who have their own heartbeat and are guilty of nothing other than existing, I know every woman and every child deserves love. We can protect the life and empower women. So let's start here in a place where we can all agree women deserve support and babies with beating hearts will be protected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to open on the motion to indefinitely postpone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I am a stickler for the rules, even when I oppose them. So LB 626 was in front of the Health and Human Services Committee, and Senator Day and I, who sit on that committee and oppose this bill, submitted a minority statement, which is available to everyone publicly online with this bill. In that statement, we included the pages of those individuals on both sides, opponents and proponents, who showed up. If they weren't even able to testify, we included them because normally they wouldn't be part of the permanent record if they didn't testify. There's additional names available on the internal portal of, and testimony of the internal portal of online statements. I encourage everyone to take time to read over that testimony. In our summary, we talked about some of the significant issues with LB 626, and we will hear about those throughout today. We will hear about the legal complications of this bill, the implications of this bill. It is not as simple as it is being portrayed by the introducer. In her closing at the committee hearing, when asked for clarifying questions, Senator Albright refused to answer. Refused to answer. I hope that today she's well rested and ready to answer the questions for clarification on the implications of this bill. Like, how does the rape exemption work? Because you would not answer that when asked. And it is not clear. This is not a clear legal document. This is problematic to its core. I have stated, and Senator Day has stated in the committee minority statement, many of the issues with this bill. We heard hours upon hours of testimony in addition to the written testimony from the medical community in opposition to this bill. Throughout today, I will make sure that everyone in this chamber has access to the letters from those individuals. The medical community does not believe in this bill. The medical community opposes this bill. It is not a simple bill. It does not ban elective abortions, which, by the way, elective abortions are any abortion where the patient is not dying on the table. Doesn't mean they aren't going to die, doesn't mean they aren't going to commit suicide. They are not actively dying, therefore it is elective. So you are banning life-saving healthcare. You just aren't banning life-saving healthcare where the person isn't actively dying. It does cause problems with ectopic pregnancies. It does cause problems with fetal anomalies that are life-threatening. Patients will die, babies will die, healthy pregnancies will be diminished in this state. This is bad health care. We had dozens and dozens of doctors come and testify and tell us they are the medical professionals. They told us exactly what this bill will do, exactly how this will hurt their patients. We had the Nebraska Medical Association, which, despite what people might want to think, is not an activist organization. It is predominantly members of the Republican Party, something that we seem to forget when we are a majority Republican state, that when people come in and testify on bills, it is a majority Republicans that are coming and testifying. Republican doctors oppose this bill. Republican obstetricians oppose this bill. This is not a partisan issue. This is a healthcare issue that we have no business in. We are going to hear the legal arguments against this bill today. And I welcome Senator Albright and supporters to tell us how we are wrong. Because so far, Senator Albright has done nothing to inform me as a member of the committee and a member of this body as to how I am incorrect, other than it is just purely her belief. A belief system is not enough of a legal argument for how this is going to work. This bill is problematic. It is bad for healthcare. It is bad for Nebraska. And we don't need to be like other states that legislate away individual freedoms. We don't need to legislate away individual freedoms. Mr. President, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Day.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Day, that's 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Before I get into what I wanted to start out with, I just wanted to mention that Senator Albright's opening on this bill was full of mistruths and sometimes outright lies. And she mentioned the bill being quote unquote friendly multiple times, but I will just say that there is absolutely nothing friendly about state sanctioned forced pregnancy. It is brutal and is barbaric. And there is no way that you can paint it as friendly. There's a couple of handouts that I had passed out, two that go together, that illustrate what we're talking about today. We are talking about outlawing abortion from 6 weeks on. You can see pictures here on one of the handouts that shows what a pregnancy looks like in a Petri dish from 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and 9 weeks. There's a description here. When a sperm and egg get together, the body creates tissue in order to support the developing pregnancy. Here are the photos of that tissue from 5 to 9 week pregnancies. This is called the gestational sac, and it's like the house for the pregnancy. Inside the sac, there are cells that have the potential to become a fetus, but there is no visible embryo at this stage. Don't forget that this is what we are talking about today. This is from the Mayan Network, and if you're watching at home, that's MYA Network. You can find it online. There's a description that goes along with it of who they are, doctors, activists, and patients who want to normalize abortion care medically and culturally. Also, I had the pages hand out Tic Tacs. Everybody should have a Tic Tac on their desk. And this is a demonstration I cannot take credit for. It was done by Dr. Nancy Stotts in her testimony in front of the Florida Senate, and she demonstrated this. This is a Tic Tac. At 6 weeks gestation, a fetus is about half the size of this Tic Tac at 4 millimeters. It does not have a face. It does not have a heart. It does not have any lungs. It does not have a brain. It does not have any fingers or toes. It looks like a tadpole. And the sound that you hear on the ultrasound at this stage of pregnancy is not a heartbeat. Because in order for a heartbeat to be heard, all 4 chambers of the heart plus valves to pump blood must be present, which doesn't happen until somewhere between 17 and 20 weeks gestation. When the term heartbeat can be deemed medically accurate. To say that a 6-week pregnancy has a heartbeat is medically inaccurate. The sound you hear at 6 weeks is not a heartbeat. It's the electrical activity of the cells that will become the sinoatrial node that's pumping all of our hearts right now. So before we get into the rest of what we're going to talk about today, I want to remind everyone what we're talking about. We are putting women at risk for what you see on those pictures in front of you. For something that is half the size
1 minute.
of a Tic Tac. It does not have a heartbeat. And Senator Albright and the supporters of this bill are willing to let women die, because we know that is fact. Because it's happened in other states. We know that is verifiable fact that bills like LB 626 cause women to die because of half of a Tic Tac. Because that half of a Tic Tac is more important than her life. We are putting women at risk. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Frederickson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. We are putting women at risk. This is one of the most, if not the most consequential pieces of legislation that we will likely debate in this chamber this year. This bill has the potential to drastically shift the landscape of our state. Today is going to be a deeply emotional conversation, and I anticipate, similar to 574, it's going to be a tough, long day because it does play on emotion. And before we get too into the weeds, I might be asking kind of the impossible here, but I want us to try to look at what we're doing here with clear eyes and with a bigger picture perspective. If passed, this bill is going to set a precedent in our state. This is going to set a precedent that the government can tell you what you can or cannot do with your body. I also want to appeal to the men in the room, guy to guy. Consider for a moment what we are asking. Try to put yourself in the position of being in a medical room with a doctor and having to make arguably probably one of the most difficult decisions you might make in your lifetime. And not having the full autonomy to make the decision that is best for you and your family. I couldn't sleep last night because I was thinking for a minute what that would feel like, and I literally could not wrap my mind around that. And I think it's sort of this theme that I've seen a lot this session, this very unique session, where there's almost this assumption that we operate on under here that individuals don't know what's best for themselves. And I also think that we're kind of operating under this fantasy that if we ban abortion, it's going to go away. Data shows us in states, in countries where there are restrictions on abortions, the rates are similar as to what they are where there are not bans on abortion.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So if our goal is to reduce abortions in our state, banning abortion is not the path to do that. On a bigger picture level, we don't have the infrastructure in our state for this law. Our safe haven law from 2008 and what happened with that is an indicator of that. We didn't have the infrastructure or the supports. We're going to see similar issues for generations. And I know I'm almost out of time, and I've got a lot more to say, so I'll punch back in. But I want us to continue to think about big picture things here, colleagues, not just about the topic of abortion specifically. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, fellow Nebraskans watching this debate today. I just want to say thank you so much for all the emails and the postcards. I just have a big stack of postcards from those all over Nebraska sharing their concerns. I stand in opposition to LB 626, and I do support the indefinitely postponing this matter. You know, we are putting women at risk if LB 626 passes. But not only that, this bill would disproportionately impact those who are poor, young, those who live in rural areas, and people of color, people who are already underserved by our healthcare system and who are more vulnerable. While Scripture does not directly address abortion, Jesus taught his followers to care for the least of these. And those are the very people who will be most harmed if LB 626 passes. I am a pro-choice Catholic. My faith is so very important to me. I was raised to treat each and every one with compassion and kindness, especially those who didn't look like me or who certainly did not think like me. When we lived in Washington, D.C., I was a volunteer at Mother Teresa House for Infants for 7 years. It was run by the Missionaries of Charity. It's a house where women who were pregnant made a decision and gave the ultimate gift of love by giving their babies, their newborns, up for adoption to so many willing families and couples. Our church group took care of all the newborns every Sunday afternoon, so the Sisters Missionaries of Charity got a day of rest, a break. And I became very involved with the work that the sisters did, and I also took on night duty of the newborns, which is really challenging because at times we had 5 newborns. I share this with you because we need to treat those of a different faith with respect and dignity, and not judge them and their circumstances. Mother Teresa said, if we judge, we cannot love. You know, my district is a very diverse district with people of many faiths and no faiths, and I respect them, and I represent them and their concerns on this matter. I firmly believe in our Constitution, our Nebraska State Constitution, where we respect and honor each other, particularly those of a different belief system. You know, our freedom of religion is enshrined in our Nebraska Constitution. It says very clearly, no person shall be compelled to attend, erect, or support any place of worship against his consent, and no preference shall be given by law to any religious society, nor shall any interference with the right of conscience be permitted. It goes on to say, religion, morality, and knowledge, however, being essential to good government, it shall be the duty of the legislature to pass suitable laws to protect every religious denomination in the peaceable enjoyment of its own mode of public worship, and to encourage schools and the means of instruction. You know, I am so very grateful to have been sent so many letters of support from our faith community and clergy who are asking all of us today to be mindful of those of different faiths.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we know that this very contentious bill is actually being legally challenged by people of faith in states like Ohio, Florida, Kentucky, Indiana, and Missouri. You know, restrictions on abortion only push care out of reach and harm those that are most vulnerable. It is not my place to make healthcare decisions for anyone else. I trust Nebraskans and respect their right to make decisions that are best for their lives and their families and their own faith. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'd like to correct the record from a debate back in January. I wanted to just take a moment from a conversation that was had back in January during the re-referencing debate. During that debate, Senator Conrad had asked me whether it was my intent with LB 626 to set acceptable medical procedures for an abortion in Nebraska. I did not understand, if not just when the questions come at you, you just say what you say, and sometimes without checking your stats. But I want to make the record clear that now that it is not my intent that LB 626 be interpreted to say what is or is not acceptable medical procedure. My intent and the intent of this bill is to say that the elective abortion of babies with beating hearts will be against public policy and are detrimental to the public interest. It's also my intent, which is clear from the text of this bill, that there are no criminal penalties attached to this bill. I just wanted to set the record straight in case there's ever a legal challenge to the bill and someone wants to argue what our intent was. Again, it is not my intent or the intent of this bill to set an accepted medical procedure. So with that out of the way, we can move on. Colleagues, I'd just like to give you a little introduction into how we ended up here. But abortion was illegal in Nebraska and most other states prior to Roe versus Wade's decision in 1973, which forced legal abortion on all 50 states. After Roe was decided, Nebraska repealed its pro-life statutes. Since then, it has slowly been building protections for the unborn back into the law, little by little, under the restraints imposed upon it by the United States Supreme Court. Last June, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade in its decision, Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, ruling that Roe was egregiously wrong and on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided. Dobbs returned authority to the states and the people to decide how best to protect the lives and safety of the unborn children and their mothers. Since Roe was decided, 200,000 babies have died in Nebraska from abortion. That's 10% of our entire state's population. As of today, Nebraska still allows abortions up to 20 weeks after fertilization, many weeks beyond what is allowed by states that border us. Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, and Wyoming all have either heartbeat laws or disallow abortion entirely, making us a potential destination for abortion tourism in our state if we do not pass similar laws. Allowing abortions this late in pregnancy puts Nebraska in the company of China and North Korea rather than most democracies, which limit it to much earlier in pregnancy. In 2020 and 2021, the last year for which we have statistics, there were approximately 2,400 babies killed by abortion in Nebraska, a rate of more than 6 per day, counting weekends and holidays. In the 42 weeks since Dobbs overruled with Roe last June 24th, the day that we could have provided greater protections for preborn children, 1,800 babies or more have lost their lives to abortion in Nebraska. The Nebraska Heartbeat Act is an opportunity for generational win, one that people will be able to look back on as a moment in history where a profound shift took place in the state of Nebraska.
1 minute.
We can stop the abandonment of women to abortion, protect the unborn human beings from violence, and take a step toward restoration of public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. A baby with a beating heart deserves to be protected, and we do envision a Nebraska where every life is celebrated, valued, and protected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. I rise opposition to motion 12 and support LB 626. Yield the rest of my time to Senator Albright.
Senator Albright, you have 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Bostelman. I know that we have several objections that were given to us in the minority report, and I want to let those that were involved in writing the report know that we are ready and able to answer the questions you may have. So since rape and incest happens to be one of the concerns, I want to address that. Some say that even if the rape exception works, as you may say, there are privacy concerns. The husband or abuser could get access to the woman's medical records. To that I say it's very clear that abusers and others cannot get access to those records. At the bill hearing, the chief of the Attorney General's Health and Law section was crystal clear. We don't release information on your investigation. We will never release our findings to the complainant, and there is no subpoena. There's no public records request that would ever allow the complainant or the assailant in the case to get those records. There's never been a circumstance in my 7 years where I sent a complaint anything. So again, there was testimony, and I can certainly read that into the record later on. We have plenty of time on the floor to do so. I'd also like to address, here we go. Another one is they were asking about the fetal anomalies. There's no exceptions for fetal anomalies. You can have no compassion for a family with a devastating prenatal diagnosis. I think a lot of us can speak to that, whether it's personal or a friend or a relative or a neighbor. But I just want to say that we do have compassion for these families, and the evidence overwhelmingly supports what families want in these situations, and that's support, not abortion. And when they're offered that support, they can choose life for their child. Did you know that the New York Times ran a story last year, which they reported that the prenatal tests for rare disorders in the baby were wrong about 85% of the time? Healthy babies are being aborted every day because of inaccurate fetal anomaly diagnosis. That's concerning. At the hearing for LB 626, a doctor who opposed the LB 626 testified that almost all testing for anomalies are done for the first time at the 20-week ultrasound because they cannot see the baby's anatomy in enough detail for an accurate diagnosis before then. That's important because abortion has already been legal for 20 weeks in Nebraska for 13 years. LB 626 changes nothing about how most fetal anomaly cases are handled in Nebraska already. Some of you in this body may remember when we passed LB 506, the Compassion and Care for Medically Challenging Pregnancy Act in 2017. LB 506 made it clear for families whose unborn child is diagnosed with a fetal anomaly to access the care that is available to them for their own specific situation, and to help them grieve and cherish that time that they have with their child. Children with genetic conditions pose the same human dignity that we do.
1 minute.
A society will be judged on the basis of how it treats its weakest members. Again, some say that Nebraska law in section 28336 provides that it's a felony for performing an abortion by using anything other than accepted medical procedures. Since LB 626 makes some medical procedures illegal, that would seem to mean that they are not accepted. Therefore, LB 626 actually does impose criminal penalties. That is not correct. Section 28336, which was passed in 1977 to stop unsafe, unproven, unsanitary, unprofessional medical procedures from being practiced during abortions. It has never been used to prosecute anyone, despite the state passing several laws protecting preborn since 1977, and has nothing to do with what we'll be talking about today.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to share a survey that an organization called secularprolife.org recently asked their followers to take on the following question, which had been posed politely in good faith by a pro-choicer. Whenever I hear someone say they became pro-life after an abortion or crisis pregnancy, it seems like they're saying, I wish I didn't have the choice to have an abortion. This is a thought I can't really comprehend. Could someone please explain this thought process? And Some of the comments were from Renee F. The biggest regret for me was that I didn't know to ask to see the ultrasound screen. They turned it away from me, and for some reason I didn't ask to see it. Maybe because I was so deliriously sick that I could barely keep my eyes open. My mother wouldn't take me to the hospital for it because she wanted the abortion. Being a mother now and seeing my first ultrasound with my baby I have now, I know I would not have gone through it if I had the opportunity. Also, the emotional toll it takes on you. It's been 6 years since mine, and I still think about it every day and regret it every day. I very much wish it wasn't an available option for myself or anyone. Another comment, Nikki H. If the choice didn't exist, I probably would have told my parents sooner because I would have known they would have to find out eventually. That part would have been out of the way, and I could have enjoyed my pregnancy instead of trying to hide it for the first 4 months. I also would not have to live with the knowledge that I almost killed my son. Yes, I do wish I had not had a choice. Third one is Lori B. I definitely wish I did not have the choice. When I found out I was pregnant, I immediately wanted to keep my baby. I had no idea my high school sweetheart would react the way he did and would leave me if I had the baby. Then my previously pro-life parents scolded me for getting pregnant before marriage and pretty much pushed me to have an abortion. I was still a teen living at home, and they said, "You're on your own if you keep a baby." Then the doctor told us my baby was not a baby, just tissue. Back in the 80s, I had no idea he was lying and just saying what my parents wanted to hear. I believe had abortion been illegal, my parents would have not pushed me to get one, and I would have my child. Julia S. said, I regrettably had 2 abortions. My mother forced me to have my first one in 1976. So yes, I profoundly regret that the option was available then. I chose to have my second abortion, but only because by then, a year and a half later, I was so completely numb due to coping with the first abortion through copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. I didn't even care anymore. But I knew I was killing my first child. I was crushed, but powerless to do anything different. And I was just dead inside by the time I had my second one. I most definitely regret it, and that it was even an option. I'm glad you asked. Darcy said, I was pregnant while in high school with my now 12-year-old. If it was not a choice, I would not have had to defend my choice to keep my daughter. I wouldn't have been told that my life was over.
1 minute.
Thank you. Or been given a lot of unsolicited advice. I would likely have been given encouragement and felt empowered to take on the world. Anonymous one said, I'm post-abortive and pro-life. I wasn't given a choice by my parents as a teen. I was kicked out of the house when my dad found out I was pregnant because he didn't want me living in this house that way. I was taken to stay with family and told I couldn't go home till I had the abortion. I was told I could not stay with the family very long. I would be a bad influence to younger siblings and cousins being a pregnant teen. I hate the phrase pro-choice. Like me, many other teens and adult women are not given a choice and are coerced into and pressured into abortion. So I support LB 626, and I thank Senator Albright for bringing the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Mr. Clerk, for some items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Health and Human Services, chaired by Senator Hansen, reports Legislative Bill 357 and 430, the general file. Additionally, new A bill for Senator Linehan, Legislative Bill 754A. This bill for enacting appropriations appropriates funds to aid in the carrying out of the provisions of Legislative Bill 754. Amendments to be put in from Senator Mosier to LB 136 and Senator Erdman to LB 136. Finally, an announcement. The Appropriations Committee will hold an executive session at 10 o'clock in room 1307. Appropriations, 10 o'clock, 1307. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in adamant opposition to LB 626 and in favor of the motion to indefinitely postpone. First of all, there's a number of issues with this bill, and we're going to hear about all of them today. But I think it's important we set the record straight about a number of the things that have already been said. Prior to getting into that, however, I think the most important thing to note here is my opposition to 626 arises because I don't believe it's our job to get between a doctor and the decisions they're making with pregnant people. We as a body are not the experts in this, and we as a body are not the experts for what other people should be doing with their bodies. We've talked about that a lot this entire session, and it's frankly disconcerting, disheartening, and frustrating that we are trying to get between medical professionals and the decisions that they're making with pregnant peoples and their families, which frankly is one of the most difficult decisions an individual can make. And the notion that we are stepping in and telling these people what to do, it is incredibly frustrating to me. But what's also frustrating to me, I think, are some of the things that have been said about this legislation, and I want to make a couple of things clear. I respectfully want to push back on Senator Albright's contention that this bill does not contain criminal penalties. The intention behind whether or not something has criminal penalties is not how a court is going to read it. The court is going to read this law in the four corners of the document, and they're going to read it in conjunction with other criminal penalties that are still on the books. And I believe that this law does, can, and will criminalize doctors for performing abortions if they do so outside a single criteria as outlined in 626. Well, how can that be? We've heard time and time again that 626 doesn't contain criminal penalties. What we know is that LB 626 doesn't need to specifically say in its body that it in fact has a particular criminal penalty, because we already have a criminal penalty on the books. Senator Albright's exactly correct. Section 28336 specifically says the performing of an abortion by using anything other than accepted medical procedures is a class 4 felony. The very language that is the so-called Nebraska Heartbeat Act, which is the first part of LB 626, literally lays out what the new, modified, and accepted medical procedures will be. It says a doctor must do this before performing an abortion. A doctor cannot do this when performing an abortion. If they do perform an abortion pursuant to one of the so-called exceptions, they have to do X, Y, and Z. It is literally laying out the exact language that is a now commonly accepted or an accepted medical procedure in the state of Nebraska. And again, whether or not that is the actual intention behind the law doesn't matter. When a prosecutor brings a case against a doctor because he forgot to document the methodology with which he did this test for the so-called heartbeat, and they bring that case and ultimately this is appealed, they're going to look at the plain reading of this. And the plain reading of LB 626 says time and time again, it will be unlawful to perform an abortion. It's saying it right there. And then they're going to say, well, let's look at what penalties they are. And 28336 says it is, in fact, as I said, unlawful to perform that abortion by anything other than accepted medical procedures. So the question is going to become, what is an accepted medical procedure? And they're not going to look at the legislative intent. They're going to look at the law itself and say, hey, does LB 626 include in it any language that defines accepted medical procedure? Turn to page 10. Of LB 626, line 14. It amends a completely separate section of the law which says unprofessional conduct means any departure or failure to conform to accepted medical procedure.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And it defines variation from acceptable and prevailing practice of medicine as a violation of the Nebraska Heartbeat Act. Page 11, line 4. This bill redefines unprofessional conduct, which is inherently defined as a deviation from accepted medical procedure, as violating this law. The very language that's being put into LB 626 redefines what is accepted medical procedure. So I believe it is maybe not malicious, but certainly disingenuous to say that this is not establishing accepted medical procedure. This law will harm women. This law will more directly criminalize doctors, and it's going to put our people in Nebraska, pregnant people at risk, people who are denied care because doctors are scared that they're not just going to have their license revoked, but that they're going to be charged with a felony. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 626 and in opposition to the motion to indefinitely postpone. 626, as anticipated, is one of the most personal bills that we will talk about this session. It's personal to proponents and their desire to protect the unborn. It's personal to the opponents who feel that their personal rights are being attacked. While we talk about the details of 626, let us not ever forget the people involved. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to find someone who does not have an opinion on the topic of abortion, and also difficult to find anyone who does not have a personal story about a pregnancy, desired, undesired, fertility challenges, adoption stories, etc. I have my own personal stories that I'll share today, a little bit later on, but I think I'll save that for my next time on the mic. I think we'll have plenty of time today to talk about that. My prayer leading up to today is that my words would be filled with grace and would have a level of compassion that exceeds my own and would never, ever be interpreted as condemning of anyone, especially those who are post-abortive. That's not my role. That's not my place. My job today is to stand for what I believe is right in this battle. And I believe that standing for life can never be wrong. Standing for single moms, for babies, and for dads. Let's not forget the dads. For those who need our love and support, that will never be wrong. Before I debunk a few of the lies that have been told about 626, I want to note to Senator Day the people in my life that were one time what she so grossly compared to half a tic-tac. I've been called out a time or two for using poorly constructed metaphors, but man, this one takes a cake. My two daughters are Alyssa Claire and Lindsay Kathleen. My two sons are Andrew Creighton and Chad Michael. My grandchildren are RJ, Everett, Daisy, Emmeline, Beatrix, and Lula, all wonderfully and beautifully made. All started out small and vulnerable, all loved and loving. To compare my children, your children, our children to a piece of candy, I'm more than disappointed. Then further, to add to the comment that Senator Raybold said that the poor are the most impacted by abortion, that is clearly not true. The most impacted by abortion are the babies. How convenient that they're forgotten in this conversation. How easy to say that the poor will be disproportionately impacted, but again, it's apparently so easy to overlook the baby in this conversation. I have much more to say on this, but for the moment, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Slama. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Slama, you have 1 minute, 53 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Vongeler. And I wholeheartedly appreciate you taking a moment to reflect on life and what it means to you. We were all just half a tic-tac at one point in time. Our parents chose life, and we're here because of it. I'd like to take a quick second to counter with the time I have left Senator Dungan's arguments about LB 626 and Section 28336 and how it would impact our doctors in the state of Nebraska. Short, sweet, and simple. LB 626 has no criminal penalties. I appreciate him mentioning, if you look at the four corners of the bill, it absolutely does not have any criminal penalties. No right to sue doctors who perform unlawful abortions. It's simply a definition of reasonable medical judgment that is broader and provides a bigger safe harbor for judgment of physicians. Thank you, Mr. President, than any pro-life law in the United States. And I'll expand on this. But simply put, LB 626 does not trigger criminal charges under 28336, which states that the performing of an abortion by using anything other than accepted medical procedures is a Class 4 felony. The plain text and legislative history of 28336 illustrate that this statute deals with procedures, namely methods, types, and in what manner and setting an abortion is performed, and whether such are broadly accepted in the same medical specialty and community. It is not concerned with the restrictions on when an abortion is performed based on developmental markers, as with LB 626. The definitions of accepted medical procedures in the two states which still define the term in their abortion laws also support this reading.
when you look at legislative history, LB 38, 1977, which enacted 28336 into law, defined those accepted medical procedures as procedures of
That's
the
your
type.
time,
Thank you, Mr.
Senator.
President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I stand in opposition to indefinitely postpone, and I strongly support LB 626. I want to thank Senator Albright for having the courage to bring a bill that protects the unborn. It takes intestinal fortitude to stand up and do what she has done, and I admire you and appreciate you for doing that. Research has shown that when a baby has a heartbeat at 6 weeks, they have a 98% chance of survival. That's a pretty significant rate of survival, 98%. And Senator Frederickson said if you have a banning of abortion, you'll have more abortions. That's very similar to a comment I heard when we were going to build a fence around YRTC in Kearney. They said you can't build a fence because it'll make them want to escape more. That is foreign to me to say such a thing. Senator Raybold said we should care for the least. I agree with her. But she's got the definition wrong. Those who we should care for are the babies. It's not the mother. It's not those who are choosing to make an abortion, to have an abortion. It's the babies. It's the babies. This is about a heartbeat. This is about a human life. Doctors have taken an oath to do no intentional harm. To do no intentional harm. What does that mean? If you're a medical professional and you hear a heartbeat, there's only one conclusion that you can draw from that, and that it's a life. This is not medical care, killing someone. I don't know who we think we are, that we can choose to be God. God created those people. They deserve a chance. If there's a beating heart, there's a life. And if you took an oath and to do no intentional harm, do exactly that. We have killed 2,000 babies since abortion became legal. Those are 2,000 people in the state of Nebraska that could be working and filling some of those positions that we have vacancies. They're not here. Our state population has not grown except by those foreigners who have moved here or refugees who have been placed here. Why is that? It's because we've killed 200,000 people. These are people we've killed. This is not health care. This bill will not prevent anyone from getting the health care they need. No one. And OGBYNs do not perform abortions. Very few, if any. So we hear all of these reasons why we should continue to kill babies. And I say kill babies because that's exactly what we're doing. So we'll hear all the excuses. We'll hear all the reasons why we have to have a choice. And as Ronald Reagan once said, it's peculiar that everybody that is for abortion
1 minute
has been born already. Think about that. What if your parents had an abortion? What if your parents made the decision, we don't want that child? Where would you be? You wouldn't be here. Every one of these babies deserves a chance. Today is the day to make the right decision and support 626. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. First, I'd like to say we are putting women and patients at risk with LB 626. At the hearing, the head of the NMA, Nebraska Medical Association, came and testified in opposition and stated that LB 626 would create an incredibly short window for women to seek medical care and assess pregnancy, their overall health with a physician upon realizing they may be pregnant, even if a woman realizes she may be pregnant. Very early into a pregnancy, access to care at an early stage may be very difficult, especially within the narrow time frame created by this bill. This means any specialized medical care or guidance as to the viability of the pregnancy and its impact on the women's health would generally not occur until after rhythmic activity could potentially be detected. LB 626 would greatly restrict the care that can be afforded to these women whose own health may be jeopardized by this pregnancy. In the closing of LB 626 hearing, I asked Senator Albright to explain the exception for rape. This was my question. What is your intention of this process when an adult, not a minor, comes to the doctor's office, requests an abortion, they're past 6 weeks and they say, I've been raped? What is your intention for that process to be? Answer, whatever it is today. If it has a heartbeat and it's living, then they're going to have choices to make, right? You don't have to do it the night of the, I asked, so when they say they are raped, how is that being documented so the medical professional doesn't lose their license by providing the abortion? It'll be documented just as it is today, was the answer. It is not documented today. That's the point. Senator Albright, well, it's going to be whatever it is today. They're going to handle it the same way. My response, you keep saying nothing is changing, but you're changing things. There are lines after lines in this bill, and you are changing things, and you are just denying facts. You are changing something, and if it's the same as it is today, then they don't have to tell people that they have been raped. Today, nobody has to go to their doctor and say, I've been raped, I need an abortion. This bill requires that, and there is no explanation from the introducer. There is no record built as to how that works, and a rape is a crime. So yes, the four corners don't have legal penalties, but we are requiring a patient to report a crime. So there are legal implications, and I don't have to be a lawyer to understand that. Mr. President, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Conrad.
Senator Conrad, that's 2 minutes, 4 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Senator Kavanaugh. Colleagues, we are needlessly putting Nebraska women at risk. We are needlessly putting Nebraska doctors at risk. I stand with Nebraska doctors. I stand with Nebraska women. I stand with Nebraska women, past, present, and future, who need compassionate care. Government should not shame them. It should not interfere in the doctor-patient relationship, and it should not criminalize women and doctors. Colleagues, I stand with Nebraska voters who don't support this radical abortion ban. And let's be clear about what's really going on here. The First Amendment may protect your opinion, your hypocrisy, your half-truths, and your political propaganda, but that doesn't make it accurate or right. Nebraska doctors have come out in force to tell us these exceptions are not workable. They're meant to make you feel better. They're meant to confuse the public.
1 minute.
That's what's going on here. We know the exceptions aren't workable solutions nor humane, and it's not hyperbole or academic. Look at our sister states that have passed similar radical abortion bans, and the articles and the court cases are replete with many examples of people who were raped, who were victims of incest, who had medical emergencies, who had fetal anomalies, who could not get care. Look in the face of 10-year-olds who could not get care. Look in the face of women who had to flee their home state to get compassionate care, and the pressure that put on their family and their bottom line and their future. Those are real things. And you're bringing it to Nebraska needlessly because you can. Not because Nebraskans want it, not because there's a public health need, but it's a raw exercise of political power
That's your time,
to
Senator.
deny human rights.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 626 against the motion to IPP. I want to thank Senator Albright for her relentless efforts in protecting innocent life in Nebraska and thank her for her commitment to this endeavor. And with that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Slama. Thank you.
Senator Slama, that's 4 minutes, 38 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Breezy. Just to respond to Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Conrad's comments, there's a lot to unpack here. We'll see if we can get to all of them. I'd encourage anybody who wants follow-up information for me to speak with me on the mic about this. I'm grateful Senator Kavanaugh brought up the rape and incest exception because obviously if you look at the four corners of the bill, LB 626, section 5.2, you can see it under section 28.902, it handles when somebody is using the rape and incest exception to this bill when they're 18 years of age or older. In that legislative record, Senator Albright was, as she is, dead on with her reading and the interpretation of how LB 626 would apply here. LB 626 section 5.2 says what procedure the physician must follow to perform an abortion under the rape exception. He must write down that the abortion is because of rape, write down that he has complied with all requirements of a healthcare provider under Nebraska Revised Statutes 28.902 and put it in her medical file. Private medical file. That is it. End of story. Thank you very much. Moving on. There is no required report. There is no required action by the woman. There is no criminal charges that must be filed. There is not anything related to that in this bill or in our statutes, and misleading women who have been victims of some of the most horrific things that can happen to a person is wrong. Senator Kavanaugh knows that. She's trying to push scare tactics to push opposition to this bill. It's sad. Also, to my colleagues that are using a 10-year-old being raped as an example of someone who could not receive abortion care under this bill, they know that's false. They know that 10-year-olds can't consent to sex in the state of Nebraska. They know that children can't consent to sex in the state of Nebraska. Every child you can throw up here, the Indiana example, any hypothetical towards that end, they know it would fall under the rape and incest exception as clearly spelled out in LB 626, section 5, because they cannot consent. It is rape to have sex with a 10-year-old. Moreover, I believe somebody brought up public opinion, referenced a poll pushed by a pro-choice activism group. The WPA Intelligence Group actually did a survey in the state of Nebraska, which I'm going to reference now, and they found that Nebraskans support protecting a baby with a beating heart, 58% support, 33% oppose. Majority of Nebraskans support a bill outlawing abortions once a heartbeat is detected, or in the case of rape, incest, and to save the mother's life, as outlined in LB 626. Nebraskans strongly reject the Democrats' mission to allow abortion up until the moment of birth, which is what has been outlined by the opposition to this bill by saying we don't want to get between a patient and her doctor. They want unrestricted abortions up until the moment of birth. And if they would like to counter that argument for when it's appropriate for the legislature to get between a doctor and their patient, I'd encourage them to get on the mic and counter me on that. Nebraskans overwhelmingly reject allowing abortions up until the moment of birth. That is a, thank you, Mr. President, that is a 72-21 split. And this extreme policy is supported only by 16% of independents and less than a third of women and less than half of Democrats. So moving on from public opinion, and I can reference more of this bill, more of this poll if you'd like, but getting into the Nebraska legislative history on accepted medical procedures, LB 38, 1977, which enacted 28.336 into law, which has been referenced by some of the attorneys on the floor as pointing towards criminal penalty, non-existent criminal penalties for LB 626. defines accepted medical procedures as procedures of the type and performed in a manner and in a facility that is equipped with surgical, anesthetic, resuscitation, laboratory equipment sufficient to meet the standards of medical care which physicians in the same neighborhood or in similar communities engaged in the same or similar lines of work would ordinarily exercise and devote to the benefit of their patients.
That's your
I'll
time,
revisit
Senator.
this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Lowe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Luke 1, 38 through 46. And Mary said, Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. And Mary arose in those days and went into the hill country with haste, into the city of Judah, and entered into the house of Zacharias and saluted Elizabeth. And it came to pass that when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leapt in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Ghost. And she spake out loud in a voice and said, Blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb. And whence is this to me, that the matter of my Lord should come to me? For lo, as soon as the voice of thy salutation sounded in mine ears, the babe leapt in my womb for joy, and blessed is she that believed. For there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord. And Mary said, My soul doth magnify the Lord. I listened to Father Mike Schmitz in the morning, his priest in Minnesota. I'm going to paraphrase what he said. So John, who was the precursor, a prophet and Baptist, and a baby in his mother's womb, and Elizabeth, who had been pregnant for 6 months. Now remember, Elizabeth is an old lady. John, the baby Baptist, was filled with the Spirit from his mother's womb when the Blessed Virgin Mary, with Jesus in her womb, newly conceived. I believe within several days, if not several days, at the most a week or two. And she began walking and riding a donkey immediately after conception from Nazareth to Judah, which is approximately 90 miles over hill country, figuring 15 miles a day. She in her teens could easily have traveled that far in a week with a caravan, even with a brand new baby in her womb. When Mary and her new baby in her womb, she approaches Elizabeth, and John is in Elizabeth's womb, and the Holy Spirit is communicated in some miraculous, incredible way from the womb of the Virgin Mary in Jesus Christ himself to the womb of Elizabeth, John the Baptist, and John leapt. And that is why abortion is clearly evil. And that is why abortion is clearly evil. But for a Christian, if they read the Gospels and study them, that they would come to the same conclusion, that the baby in the womb is a human being and a person, even at 6 weeks. I just received an email from a fellow, and he quotes Dr. Seuss. And Senator Halloran, I'm not speaking of you, but a person is a person, no matter how small they are. With that, I yield the rest of my time to Senator Hansen.
Senator Hansen, you have 1 minute, 5 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to touch on a couple of things that we mentioned before and some other people, opponents brought up, was about the idea of reasonable medical judgment. Just quickly, reasonable medical judgment means a medical judgment that could be made by a reasonably prudent physician, knowledgeable about the case and the treatment possibilities with respect to the medical conditions involved. This is nothing new. This has been used for decades. And I can almost guarantee everybody sitting in the balcony right now wearing white coats understand this definition. This is something that says they make the decision that they feel that they best know how, based on their training, based on their judgment, based on their experience. This is nothing new. And so to say that doctors are going to be thrown in jail, are going to go to prison, are going to be fined left and right is blatantly false. Unless they are making decisions with ill intent and doing things purposely, it is wrong. So if this is something that I can't even think of any instances where people were thrown in jail or got their license revoked if they made reasonable medical judgment and it was prudent, based on actually a board of their peers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I rise in support of the motion to indefinitely postpone and oppose to the bill, and this bill does put pregnant people at risk. So there's been a lot of conflation, obfuscation, wishful thinking about what this bill does. And I appreciate the attempt at a substantive conversation, but when we're talking about the potentiality for criminal penalties, and it's not a scare tactic to say that the advocates for this bill are downplaying what will happen if this bill is adopted. That section of the statute, 28-336, says that it is a crime to perform an abortion not in compliance with medical procedure, accepted medical procedure. There was a definition, apparently, in the statute close to 40 years ago. That definition is no longer there. We can look to the courts and how they interpret statute, and they will interpret, when we pass the statute, that we understand the whole of the code of the state of Nebraska when we do it. And one part of that code is 28-336. And if you look to 28-336 and it says accepted medical procedure, you heard Senator Dungan, I think, pretty accurately describe the actual words of 626. And 626 lays out a procedure and practice under which it's acceptable to perform an abortion. If you read those two things in conjunction, it is not out of the realm of possibility. It's actually pretty likely that someone could be charged on that statute. And the reason I say that is this bill, along with basically any other bill that's been passed in the space of abortion regulation in this state, has a disclaimer in it that says, no woman shall be liable under this statute. It's in this bill, curiously, because this bill, as all the advocates argue, applies to doctors. So it is hard to conceive of a circumstance under which a woman would be held liable for her medical license if she sought an abortion. But it's also in the previously adopted statutes around this. However, we have seen in circumstances many times where women are charged with other offenses, not the abortion itself. We had one example in this state just last summer, less than a year ago, where a young woman was charged for a number of other crimes related to her receiving an abortion. The concern here, and it's a real one, this is not a scare tactic, this is a real legitimate concern, that there are political motivations in prosecution in particular around issues like abortion. And that when there is an opportunity for an elected official to make political hay by prosecuting someone, they will find a way to do it. And this bill opens up doctors to that criminal liability under that particular section because it is a potential option under the plain reading of the language of this statute, under the plain reading of the language of this bill, and under the court's interpretation of how we read bills and laws together going forward. And so you can stand here and say, don't worry, this bill is not going to cause these problems.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is clearly not borne out by the language of this bill, the language of the laws we've already adopted in this state, and the court's interpretations. And so when you're listening to this argument, if you're one of the, I don't know, one person in here who's perhaps undecided, don't be fooled by the downplaying and the minimizing of what this bill will do. So I've got other things to talk about, but that's what I want to talk about at this point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support of motion 12, and I do hope that we have the votes to not move LB 626 forward, but I don't believe that's what's going to happen. With that said, like every abortion bill we have had since I've been in this body, I think there are a lot of mechanical issues when it comes to the writing of this bill. Before I start addressing those, because I'm going to speak more than once today, I want to address some of the things just real briefly that I heard on the mic that I'm concerned about. One of them was when our Lieutenant Governor warned everybody in the balcony not to make noise and that they had the ability to have them removed. I don't remember that announcement the day that we had the anti-trans bill and we had people sobbing in the balcony while another group applauded right next to that group. I also think it's really interesting how we increase law enforcement on days like this. When we had children that were from the trans community, we had extra law enforcement and some of the senators were escorted out. Today it's the same. I think it's very interesting who we consider dangerous in Nebraska and how we are scared of hearing strong women share their views. So I just want to make sure that that goes on record. One of the questions that I hope that Senator Albright will answer when she stands, because I don't want to use my time to ask her on the mic, is I keep hearing her use the phrase abortionist. And I've talked about this before on past bills. I want to know the difference between an abortionist and an OBGYN. Because we use words like abortionist and then we start thinking back alley. We don't start thinking about medical care, about care for women. What is the difference, Senator Albright? I've never heard you say OBGYN. I always hear you say abortionist. Senator Frederickson, when you said you were going to talk guy to guy, I thought you were actually going to ask all the guys in this body why it's okay for men to wantonly spread their seed and make women pay for it after the fact. But you didn't. But there's always more time in the future. Because we know what really truly causes unexpected pregnancies. And women don't do it on their own. So with that, let's talk about the technical issues. And Senator Slama and Senator Michaela Kavanaugh did cover it, but they never really touched down on what I found. So Section 5 directs that if a physician performs an abortion in the case of sexual assault or incest, the physician shall certify in writing that the abortion was performed because of sexual assault or incest and that the physician complied with all the duties of a healthcare provider required by Section 28-902, which I have handed out to everybody. And if you note, there's a vote sheet on the back. There are still people in the body that voted for this, LB 1132. So Section 28-902 allows for sexual assault survivors to receive medical care and be anonymous. That's what we're missing about talking on today. That's what we're missing out on. The anonymous reporting provision was passed into law in 2018 to not require sexual assault or human trafficking survivors to disclose their abuser or trafficker. The concern was if survivors or people who were abused were required to report and cooperate with law enforcement, they would not seek necessary care for themselves. And Senator Albright did vote for the anonymous reporting bill. And this is not a gotcha moment. What this is just a reminder that we voted for that for a reason. So how will this protection for being anonymous be maintained with the bill's requirement that the physician shall keep a written certification as to sexual assault in the woman's medical record? And can a doctor keep a file in an anonymous form, like with a number assigned to patients? How does it work? I don't see that in the bill. And that's what's always missing with these bills are mechanisms. You say you want certain things, but you don't say how they will work. This isn't like a constitutional amendment when it comes back to the body and we get to decide how something's going to work, like voter ID. We are moving forward policy, but we are not describing clearly how that policy is going to work, Senator Albright. With that, I have a lot more issues with the bill that I'm hoping to discuss on the mic today. I think that when it comes to how this bill is going to work, it is not clear. And again, I am very concerned about the bias when people come in reference to bills like this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB 626 and opposed to the motion from Senator Hunt. Abortion was illegal in Nebraska and most other states prior to the Roe versus Wade decision in '73, which forced legal abortion on all 50 states. After Roe was decided, Nebraska repealed its pro-life statutes. Since then, it has slowly been building protections for the unborn back into the law, little by little, under the restraints imposed upon it by the U.S. Supreme Court. Last June, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade in its decision, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, ruling that Roe was egregiously wrong and on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided. Dobbs returned authority to the states and the people to decide how best to protect the lives and safety of unborn children and their mothers. Since Roe was decided, 200,000 babies have died in Nebraska from abortion, 10% of our entire state population. As of today, Nebraska still allows abortions up to 20 weeks after fertilization, many weeks beyond what is allowed by states that border us, Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, Wyoming. They all have either a heartbeat law or they disallow abortion entirely. And that makes us a potential destination or abortion tourism state if we do not pass similar laws. Allowing abortions this late in pregnancy puts Nebraska in the company of China and North Korea rather than most democracies, which limit it to much earlier in pregnancy. In 2020 and 21, the last year for which we have statistics, there were approximately 2,400 babies killed by abortion in Nebraska, a rate of more than 6 per day, counting weekends and holidays. In the 42 weeks since Dobbs overruled Roe last June 24th, the day we could have provided greater protections for preborn children, 1,800 babies or more have lost their lives to abortion in Nebraska. The Nebraska Heartbeat Act is an opportunity for a generational win, one that people will be able to look back on as a moment in history where a profound shift took place in the state of Nebraska. We can stop the abandonment of women to abortion, protect unborn human beings from violence, and take a step toward the restoration of public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. A baby with a beating heart deserves to be protected. We envision a Nebraska where every life is celebrated, valued, and protected. I walked past some signs on the way into the building this morning. They kept using the word ban over and over. It's been said that LB 626 is a total abortion ban because women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. That's simply not true. During the hearing, proponent Dr. Ingrid Schupp said at the time of fertilization, quote, the embryo travels about 5 to 7 days before implanting in the uterus. Upon implantation, immediately the pregnancy hormone is detectable in the blood within a day or so. So women within, I would say, 7 to 10 days of fertilization of the creation of that embryo can find out they're pregnant, end quote. Dr. Emily Patel said as an opponent, that with how the gestational age is calculated for pregnancy, a woman knows she is pregnant at 4 weeks, leaving 2 weeks or so for a woman to make a decision on the pregnancy. Another opponent, Dr. Megan Oakes, said that a positive pregnancy test can come out at 4 weeks of pregnancy, again stating there are 2 weeks to make a decision. Dr. Stephanie Guston, also an opponent, said we can often reliably detect the presence of a pregnancy as early as 3.5 weeks. Proponent and opponent testifiers agree. This is not a total abortion ban. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Breezy announces some guests in the South balcony, members of the 2023 Phi Theta Kappa, all Nebraska academic team from community colleges. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Halloran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. Colleagues, since Planned Parenthood and its supporters are the primary drivers of the opposition to this bill, I believe we should review the roots, the racist foundation of Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood. She promoted the philosophy and social movement of eugenics that argues it is possible to improve the human race and society by encouraging reproduction by people or populations with desirable traits, term positive eugenics, and discouraging reproduction by the people with undesirable qualities, term negative eugenics. Another renowned practitioner of eugenics, the development of a super race, was Adolf Hitler, the notorious promoter of a super race. Margaret Sanger preached the gospel, and I quote, race improvement, and denounced what she called, quote, human weeds and morons and idiots and imbeciles and the dead weight of human waste, end of quote. She took that message to some outrageous audiences. In May 1926, Sanger spoke to the women's chapter of the KKK in Silver Lake, New Jersey, which she wrote about on page 366 of her 1938 autobiography. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan. The founder of Planned Parenthood accepted an invitation to and spoke to the KKK. She was a smash hit. A quote from Sanger's 1938 autobiography described her invitation to talk to the women's branch of the KKK. At Silver Lake, New Jersey, Margaret Sanger says, and I quote, never before had I looked into a sea of faces like these. I was sure that if I uttered one word such as abortion, outside the usual vocabulary of these women, they would go off into hysteria. And so my address that night had to be in the most elementary terms, as though I were trying to make children understand. In the end, and I quote, through simple illustrations, I believe I had accomplished my purpose. A dozen invitations to speak to similar KKK groups were proffered. She apparently impressed the KKK. Do liberals complain about this racist history of the founder of Planned Parenthood today? No, not at all. Liberals revere Sanger. If there was a progressive Mount Rushmore, they'd have a long chiseled Maggie's mug on the mountain. Hillary Clinton glows that she is in awe of Sanger. She said so in 2009 upon receiving Planned Parenthood's highest honor. That year, its coveted Margaret Sanger Award. Likewise in awe was Nancy Pelosi when she proudly accepted the award in 2014. Speaking to Planned Parenthood a year earlier, Barack Obama, America's first black president, hailed the organization founded by the racist eugenist, committed to creating a, quote, race of thoroughbreds and purging America's, quote, race of degenerates. Margaret Sanger said the following about her 1939, and I quote, Negro Project, a project established to control the, quote, Negro population. Quote, we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out the idea if it even occurs to any of their rebellious members. End of quote. Thus, the support of individuals such as Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. The objective of the Negro Project was to infiltrate the black community by presenting birth control, then abortion today.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, as health options for women to kill off the black race. Kill them off by limiting the growth of population by abortion and sterilization. They knew that some blacks would figure out their sinister plot, so it was decided by Sanger to take plan to the clergy and charismatic members of the black community to have them deliver the death message to their congregations and constituents. The 2010 census results reveal that Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest chain of abortion clinics, is targeting minority neighborhoods. 79% of its surgical abortion facilities are located within walking distance of African American or Hispanic Latino neighborhoods. About 13% of American women are Black, but they submit to over 35% of the abortions. Margaret Sanger's racist plan is working. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Haller. And Senator Mosher, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I have signed on to 626 as a co-sponsor, and the reason is that I stand with the 200,000 babies that were aborted since 1973. And I'm not going to focus on the cases here and there where women have pregnancies and the situation surrounding the pregnancy was not their choice or whatever adds to their adds the complication to their situation, how they decide to move forward. But 200,000 babies have died since 1973, and the vast majority of those were elective. The vast majority of those were elective. Abortion laws in adjoining states are as strict or stricter than abortion laws would be under 626. To listen to the discussion on this bill, you would think that Nebraska was an outlier in abortion restrictions. Well, it does look like we're an outlier. It looks like we're more permissive than the adjoining states. 626 addresses that. In the course of running for office, I talked to thousands of citizens in my district. The vast majority of those that mentioned abortion wanted stricter abortion laws. Right to Life sent out thousands of postcards to voters informing people, citizens, of the candidates' positions on abortion. So the voters were informed. They know, where I stood, and the vast majority of the citizens in my district still support stricter abortion laws. With that, I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Hansen, if he would like it.
Senator Hansen, you have 2 minutes, 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another thing I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit, during the Health and Human Services Committee hearing for this bill, we did listen to a lot of testimony. Senator Day was correct. A lot of emotional testimony for a long time. And some of the questions that I asked and some of the questions that were asked of people on the committee as well was the timeline. I think Senator Hardin kind of touched on this a little bit. How much time does a woman have, a pregnant female have, to determine when she is pregnant and make a decision on whether she should or should not get an abortion if this law is passed? The prevailing theme and the general consensus, it seemed, among both the proponents and the opponents was that a woman would have approximately 1.5 to 2 weeks of decision time after she finds out that she is pregnant. I think you're probably able to find out if you're pregnant before that with pregnancy tests, certain hormones that are going on. But my point is, what I'm getting at is it seemed like both groups agreed that 1.5 and 2 weeks was a timeline somebody had to make a decision. Granted, this is a very difficult decision to make, something I'm going to touch on again later. I feel that's an adequate time to make a decision such as this. 1.5 to 2 weeks seems, again, it might be different for all kinds of people. I'm just telling you how I feel and what I think. And so that is one thing, that is a timeline that Senator Hardin was kind of touching on.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things I'm going to touch on here again later is, I think, and I'm not going to be remiss to say, I would think everybody in this room would agree that it is a difficult decision for somebody to make the decision to or to not get an abortion. Everybody here has mentioned that. Everybody hearing mentioned that. That's a difficult decision. What I want people to think about is, why is it a difficult decision? If it's just a clump of cells, if it's just like a mole, if it's just like a tumor, it shouldn't be a difficult decision. When somebody goes to the dermatologist to get a mole removed or a benign tumor removed, I think that decision-making capability is different than somebody going into an abortion clinic. I think subconsciously we know that is a life, and that is a difficult decision to make. And I'm not going to deny that of anybody getting an abortion or thinking about getting an abortion or not.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. We are putting women at risk. There are two questions that we're addressing today. The first is a pregnancy a person in the same way as I am or you are? And some people think it is, and some people do not. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on my next time on the microphone, but that isn't a question for science. It's a question for philosophy and theology. But the second question, the one I want to talk about right now, is whether the application of this bill will work the way proponents want it to, or whether it will put more people at risk. Here are some of the things we know. Regardless of what we do here today, abortion will not go away. We can find ancient Egyptian steles that talk about abortion. It isn't some new thing. It existed before Roe, and it exists after. It exists in countries with restrictions and in those that do not have them. Senator Frederickson shared that in places with abortion restrictions and without them, there are pretty much the same number of abortions. So abortion isn't going to go away. It is part of the human experience. It can be safer or less safe for women, but it will not go away. So if we pass this bill, what we will do is make abortion less safe, and we will put women at risk. A few years ago, there was, I think they called them the TikTok challenge, but it might have been still Facebook, I don't remember, in which young teenagers ate Tide Pods as a kind of a joke or I don't know what. They did it as a lark. Imagine now a child who is pregnant and is terrified about that prospect. If they will eat a Tide Pod for free, what might they do to themselves to try to address that situation? Think of the children who will look up on the internet, because every single one of them who's 14 years old, basically this day and age, has one of these with the internet on it. If they are willing to do these things that will kill them on a lark, what will they do when they are scared? What sort of thing will come up on the internet? What sort of advice do you imagine will come up on the internet? And here's the most terrifying scenario that I think will repeat itself over and over again. Colleagues, we've worked a lot in the Judiciary Committee across all political ideologies on the problem of trafficking. A child
1 minute.
who is concerned about what's going to happen to their body in a pregnancy, what's going to happen to them in a pregnancy, might reach out to a doctor if this becomes impossible for them to get legally. And how many of those doctors who want to meet them secretly because of the bill that we passed today will actually be doctors? And how many of them will be traffickers? Because the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my life, colleagues, is that there is a market for young pregnant women. That means that there are people who want to sell them. Let's not give tools to traffickers. If you're scared about voting against this bill, considering how scared a young girl is who has been trafficked.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Day, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first thing I wanted to mention is it appears that Senator Albright has handed out an article with the photos, I will say, computer-generated photo of what I think we typically think of, we've seen in the media, of what a 9-week pregnancy looks like. And I will tell you that this article comes from a blog, a pro-life blog called Pregnancy Help News. If you Google reverse image search this, you find it all over religious websites. This is not a real photo. It's not real. It's a computer-generated image that is not real, which is why these photos are so powerful, because they show what an actual 9-week pregnancy looks like. And let's not forget, we're not talking about 9-week pregnancies. We're talking about 3 weeks prior to that. We're talking about 6-week pregnancies. Okay? This is not real. This is from a pro-life blog. Not real. This is from doctors. It is real. And I appreciate Senator Von Gillern mentioning that his kids are not Tic Tacs. Sometimes you guys are so close, you're so close to getting the point. You're almost there. My kids are not Tic Tacs either. They're fully developed human beings that do not require someone else's body and someone else's organs to survive. There is a fundamental difference. And that's the point. There is a fundamental difference between a fully developed human being that does not require a person's uterus and placenta and their body to develop and survive, and something that is the size of half of a Tic Tac that does not have a brain, it does not have a heart, it does not have any fingers and toes. You're almost there. That's the point. I wanted to share some stories today of other examples in other states of how laws like 626 have affected the lives of pregnant people. This is a story from the state of Texas, from Amanda and Josh Zerwoski. Amanda stated that she was 18 weeks pregnant on August 23rd and went for a walk. She could tell something was wrong, so she messaged her OB, and upon examination discovered she had an incompetent cervix and had started to dilate. Her doctor informed her that a miscarriage was inevitable. She and her husband asked what the next steps were. What were her options? She was informed that under Texas law, and this would be similar to LB 626, because the pregnancy still had a heartbeat. She was informed that under Texas law, the only option she had was to continue to carry the pregnancy that would not survive and simply wait until she became sick enough. Essentially, her life had to be in danger before they could intervene. All medical professionals that they had consulted informed her that legally, this was her only option. She could not decide for herself. She could also not decide for her daughter. Her doctors could not even decide for her based on best medical practices. Ms. Zerwoski states through tears, being told that we were going to lose our baby and that there was nothing we could do, I was left wanting either to get so sick that my life is at risk or that my baby's heart stopped beating so that it could be over. Thank you. 3 days later, Amanda was admitted to the hospital with a 102-degree fever. At this point, doctors were now legally allowed to deliver her now stillborn child. She did not know that at this point she had become septic. Sepsis can set in rapidly if a pre-viable pregnancy continues after a patient's water breaks. Sepsis can lead to damage, shock, and eventually death. Amanda's husband, Josh, stated, "It was so frustrating to be dealing with something so traumatic and then to be forced to gamble with the outcome of Amanda's life unnecessarily." Amanda was in the ICU for a week but did survive. You think about all the people that aren't as fortunate as us, about how this is going to impact their lives. Meanwhile, all of the staff at the hospitals were talking about these types of laws are not going to end abortion. It's just going to make it extremely dangerous, and the mortality rate is going to skyrocket.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Merman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I rise in support of LB 626 and against the motion to indefinitely postpone. Is a human being, especially with a beating heart, living inside another human being, which, by the way, is a female, not a pregnant person, a human life? It all boils down to this question. Now I'm going to read from the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's in our Declaration of Independence. So is it a human life or not? Follow the science. A baby at 6 weeks has different DNA than the mother. The eye color has already been determined. The hair color has been determined. Everything genetically has already been determined. And quite often, eye color, hair color, and different characteristics will be much different than that of the mother or the father, for that matter. So it's not anti-women to be against abortion. It's actually pro-woman. We're trying in this society now to take even motherhood away from women. We should be supporting motherhood and families and not trying to prevent that from happening. As has been already mentioned, the abortion laws in the United States are very similar to those in China and North Korea, and much different than the rest of the democracies in the world. You can see what's happened in China. Many more females have been aborted than males. So to say being pro-life is anti-woman is definitely wrong. And also, it's definitely not racist to be pro-life. There's a disproportionate number of people of color that are aborted compared to the percentage in the population as to the white race. So it's actually supporting people of color and not racist to be pro-life. So I'm going to go back to the original question that I asked. Is a human being living inside another human being, especially a human being inside another human being that has a living heart or a beating heart, is that actually a human being? It all boils down to that simple question. Thank you, Mr. President. I would give the rest of my time to Senator Albright if she would like it.
Senator Albright, that's 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Merman, and thank you, President. Thank you for the time so that I can answer back to Senator Blood. She did ask about an abortionist, and I want to help people understand that LB 626 is about elective abortions. So there are about 2 people in the state of Nebraska that would do this. That would be Mr. Carhart, doctor, if you would like to be called that.
1 minute. 1 minute.
And Planned Parenthood. The vast majority of OBGYNs do not perform elective abortions in the state of Nebraska. And again, 626 is about babies with beating hearts that deserve to be protected. And I'd be happy to get back on the mic and talk a little bit more about this same subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the motion and in opposition to LB 626, which needlessly puts Nebraska women at risk and Nebraska doctors at risk. Again, the First Amendment protects those that are pushing this measure, this human rights violation. It protects their right to push this political propaganda, but that's what it is. They're trying to wrap it up in religion and science and medicine, but it stands in the face of every major medical organization, legal experts that tell us this is not medical language, this is not medical practice, this is not legal nor workable from a human rights perspective. That is clear. That's 100% clear. And the flowery language about caring about children and mothers, the hypocrisy is palpable. If that were true, you would meet us robustly together, fighting for maternal health, fighting for pregnancy outcomes, fighting for reproductive justice, fighting for childcare, fighting for healthcare, fighting for mental health care. And you don't. Let's roll back the tape just a week, colleagues, where most of the people that are pushing this measure voted against giving breakfast and lunch to school children who couldn't afford it. Exhibit A. And there's an Exhibit A through Z that's replete in this legislative record, and your hypocrisy is palpable. Let's talk about these exceptions, which are unworkable, and the proponents know it. If they weren't terrified about the criminal implications of this measure, Senator Albright wouldn't have saw fit to walk back her concession during the referencing debate, which she knows is accurate and true. And it doesn't take a legal expert to look at the text of LB 626 and see there is no repealer, specific or general, in regards to the host of criminal penalties on the books regarding abortion care, period. Let's also talk about the cruelty and the misinformation that goes into saying there's humane, compassionate exceptions for life of the mother. That's not true. And again, it's not hyperbole. We don't have to guess. We don't have to hypothesize. Our sister states that have passed radical abortion bans like this, that yes, Senator Hardin, criminalize, that prevent abortion care before most women know that they're pregnant. And we need a lot less mansplaining and a lot more momsplaining about how bodies work. And it's no surprise to anyone that every pregnancy is different, every cycle is different, and you cannot craft a law that encompasses all aspects of the human condition, period. The proponent of this measure, Senator Albright, which turns the enforcement mechanism over to Attorney General Hilgers, are clear and on record in the Nebraska Right to Life survey as reported in the Journal Star in 2020. They do not believe in any such thing as the life of a mother exception. That's who's pushing this bill, and that's who will enforce this bill. So don't kid yourself and say that there's a humane life of the mother exception, because those pushing this measures don't believe that is ever the case. They're not even trying to hide it. That's in the newspaper. That's their actual sincere position. So be clear about that. And any minute a doctor hesitates when a mom's life is at risk, puts that life at risk.
1 minute.
And most women who seek abortion care in Nebraska are already moms, have kids at home, have families at home, but they're trying to make the best decision for themselves with their doctor, with their family, to take care of their family. And they tell us why they're seeking abortion care. There's scores of data from the annual reports put out by DHHS, because their contraception fails or they don't have access to it. Where are you in supporting efforts to increase access to family planning? You're not on the board. If there's a fetal anomaly, there's no exceptions here. If people are victims of incest or sexual assault, those exceptions are unworkable, and the experts in the field have told you so. They seek abortion care because their own life and health and mental health is at risk. And there are unworkable exceptions in this bill for this. And they seek abortion care for socioeconomic reasons.
That's your time, Senator.
Issues that you stand against economic justice as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Sanders, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Nebraskans. I rise in support of LB 626, and I thank Senator Albright for introducing this legislation. I agree that a baby with a beating heart deserves to be protected. Senator Slama mentioned the WPA poll released on January 5th this year that shows that 58% of Nebraskans support this policy. A heartbeat is a universal sign of life. Another universal belief, one that I believe we share in this body, is that taking of an innocent life is wrong and unjust. In fact, there is scientific consensus among biologists that life begins earlier than a heartbeat. There was a study published in November 2021 in the issue Law and Medicine journal by Dr. Stephen Jacobs, focusing on the scientific view when life begins. Dr. Jacobs found in an earlier survey that 80% of Americans thought that biologists were most qualified to determine when life begins. So Jacobs surveyed thousands of biologists across multiple countries and multiple political spectrums, all of which were affiliated with an educational institution. 95% of respondents held a PhD, 63% were non-religious, 85% defined themselves as pro-choice. What did the study find? 97% of consistent respondents affirmed the fertilization view of life begins. That's 1,011 out of 1,044 respondents when given a statement, a mammal's life begins at fertilization. 77% of respondents affirmed that statement. My staff will be happy to make copies of this study for your reference. The paper also established that medical literature recognizes the fertilization view. There is a scientific consensus that life begins at conception. Fertilization view is the leading biological view on the beginning of human life. That scientific fact should influence every conversation we have about abortion. I think science has a duty to promote this fact so that people and policymakers can make intelligent decisions. This is what the pro-life community has believed all along. And these studies are great examples of how service has advanced since Roe versus Wade. Now, to be clear, today we are talking about a heartbeat. We do not need scientific study to tell us that a beating heart means life. I mentioned the study because I see Nebraska that cares about every life. We want to celebrate, value, and protect every life, including the most vulnerable among us. This bill does just that. We know that taking an innocent life is unjust. We know that heartbeat is the universal sign of life. This is why I support LB 626. Senator Albright's bill makes this doctor-friendly, more so than any other abortion limits in this country. I am also thankful that Senator Albright introduced 606 to support pregnant mothers
1 minute.
who need help. Mothers deserve better than abortion. I said very similar things during last year's debate, but I will say it again. I am honored to work with all of you. I believe there is one person here I believe there's not one person here that believes in taking an innocent life is acceptable. This is why we have to pass this bill. Under no instance is it just the end of life of human being. Abortion does just that. It stops a beating heart. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the remaining of my time to Senator Albright.
Senator Albright, that's 20 seconds.
Well, I rise in support of LB 626 in opposition of the motion from Senator Hunt. And that's probably enough of my 20 seconds, so I hope to get more time soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Ibach, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Nebraska. It's refreshing to see so many faces engaged in the balcony, and I appreciate the support that everyone's giving to this issue. It's very important. Today, I rise in support of LB 626 and against the motion to indefinitely postpone this bill. As a mother of triplets, I am pro-life. I believe this is a discussion that we should be having because to me there clearly is a compelling government interest in regulating the practice of abortion. Personally, our current law allowing abortion up to 20 weeks is excessive, and I think we all agree on that. As at this stage of pregnancy, the fetus has a beating heart. The curve of its spine has developed. The fetus has a face and their arms and legs are waving. That's our current law. To me, to abort a baby is unthinkable, and we should be protecting these children. I will continue to listen to discussion because proponents and opponents from District 44 have both made their argument with regard to this bill. I've listened to medical professionals on both sides of this argument, and I truly do take their comments and their opinions to heart. With that said, I look forward to listening further and to sharing additional thoughts this afternoon. And I would thank you, Mr. President, and yield my time to Senator Albright.
Thank you, Senator Albright. And that's 3 minutes, 18 seconds, Senator Albright.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Ibach. Appreciate the time. We had several people, obviously, the day that we had the HHS hearing, and I think it's important to read some of these testimonies that came from the doctors who've been in the field for many, many years to put it into the record. I'm going to talk about Dr. Robert Bonebrake, a Nebraska OBGYN specialist in maternal fetal medicine and a former chair of the Nebraska Maternal Morbidity and Morbility Review Team in support of LB 626. Good afternoon, Chairman Hansen and members of the Health and Human Services Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Dr. Robert Bonebrake. I'm here on my own behalf, not here on behalf of my employer or my institution. I'm a board-certified general OBGYN, maternal fetal medicine. I practice in Omaha. I've been taking care of women and babies in high-risk pregnancy situations over 27 years. Every maternal fetal medicine specialist has at least 2 patients, the woman and her baby or babies. I have cared for approximately 15,000 to 20,000 different women over 27 years of maternal fetal medicine practice. Many, if not all of these women had immensely difficult challenges to deal with. And that's why they see, of course, MFM specialist. In some cases, we know during pregnancy that the baby will not survive outside the uterus, which is incredibly hard. But even these most difficult of cases, we never have to forget the human dignity of the woman, the baby, or treat the baby as something less than our second patient. Over those 27 years of practicing maternal fetal medicine, I would dare to say that I have never had, nor have the groups I've practiced in, had a maternal death associated with a pregnancy complicated by a congenital anomaly or other abnormality of the baby. Maternal fetal specialists see a multitude of things in the many years that they practice medicine and care for women and their babies. We care for essentially every complication of pregnancy that you could think of, whether that directly involves complications with babies in utero, the woman due to underlying medical conditions that arise during or due to the pregnancy, or a combination of the mentioned possibilities. The list is too extensive to describe. However, always a paramount concern is the health and safety of the woman, yet with a care and concern for the human dignity of babies. This is best medical practice. LB 626 changes nothing for doctors in situations like these going forward. LB 626 lays out a clear standard for protecting the woman's life and health. A physician can simply ask the question, could a reasonably prudent physician knowledgeable about the case and treatment possibilities with respect to the medical condition involved have the same...
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Albright has guests in the South Balcony. They're Catholics at the Capitol. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Brewer, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have shared some of these thoughts with my colleagues before, but I think it's fitting that we have this conversation today. I believe if we come to the mic, we should be somewhat of an expert on the subject, and I am not. I'm not an expert on the birth of a baby, even though I was there for both my children's birth. I'm definitely not an expert on women. You can ask my wife about that. But I believe I am an expert on the issue of death, because I think it's safe to say that I have taken more lives than anybody in this room. So I find it challenging to not look at this maybe in a little different way. Now, I wore the uniform of my country and fought combatants on a battlefield that were armed. And you will go through your life always living with those actions. Their ghosts will haunt you. Now, that's being haunted by those who were in direct combat with you. So as I look at an unborn child, which you cannot find more innocence than is there, and to take that life, I don't know that I would be able to deal with those ghosts. So I guess as someone who has been down a much different path, I stand today in support of LB 626, because I think that when you take certain actions that haunts you and makes your life challenging in ways you cannot imagine. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time to Senator Albright.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Albright, you have 2 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Brewer, for sharing those heartfelt moments in your lifetime. I want to continue with Dr. Bonebrake's testimony where I left off. A physician can simply ask the question, could a reasonably prudent physician knowledgeable about the case and treatment possibilities with respect to the medical condition involved have come to the same conclusion that a medical emergency exists? Any physician providing best medical practices is safe under this framework, the framework of LB 626. Only those who would have reason for concern would be physicians whose conduct is so far outside of the mainstream, so indifferent to human life, that a well-informed physician could never have made the same decision. This is very easy danger to avoid while providing comprehensive and appropriate medical care. LB 626 does what we all want. It allows for the best medical care when protecting the woman of Nebraska and the unborn children. I support LB 626, and I ask that you do the same by voting yes. I'd like to quickly go to these medical emergencies that people are talking about. And I know with Senator Day, she was talking, I believe, about someone from Texas. And just for the record, I did not pass out those baby pictures. It was not me. So I'm going to go back to medical emergencies. Some of the opponents would say the exception for medical emergency is too much, too narrow, and it would prevent medical professionals from exercising professional judgment. LB 626 will make Nebraska a state with the friendliest pro-life laws for doctors in the United States.
1 minute.
They also would say something to the effect of how long do doctors have to wait to give care when a woman is bleeding or infected? Or what about hemorrhage, sepsis, cancer, just to name different complicated situations. Under LB 626, doctors will be free to exercise their medical judgment unless they are committing malpractice. Doctors in Nebraska already have been working under nearly identical standards for the last 13 years since we passed our 20-week fetal pain abortion law in 2010 that Senator Mike Flood did at that time. No doctors have been prosecuted, and babies and moms are being taken care of. The law works, and LB 626 is even friendlier to doctors than our 20-week law is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak, sir.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I stand in opposition of LB 626 in support of the motion to indefinitely postpone. There have been a lot of really, really important stories so far on both sides. But in particular, what I really want to focus on is setting a little bit of the record on why I'm against this bill and speaking to some of the economic implications. Fundamentally, I'm against this bill. I've been very, very clear. Doctors and healthcare professionals are doing everything they possibly can to ensure that individuals, families, and patients have the health care that they need. And inserting ourselves in the decision-making, the private decisions between a woman and their healthcare provider is not a decision that I should be making. It's interesting because in the same period of time that I've heard many of my colleagues, which again, in a debate, talk about the need to then invest in families and in kids and in children. We're going to be debating within our budget. We're going to be debating on the floor what we're actually doing to support low-income kids and children and families and making sure poverty is addressed and doing everything we can to make it easier for people not to make extremely difficult decisions. But the data is very clear here. And there's new data that's coming out in this area, which is abortion bans and bills like this are making it harder for us as a state to keep and attract people that want to stay in Nebraska. It is making it harder for us, for doctors, physicians, subspecialties, to see a life for themselves and their practice, to then do what they had spent years studying to make sure that they're giving the best possible care to patients. This article that I have in front of me, abortion restrictions can cause an OBGYN brain drain. We just recently talked about the need that we had to lower taxes is because we need to keep people here. I'm one of the people that voted for that, by the way. I'm all for trying to keep people here. We've been talking about the brain drain for years. We are doing a lot to make sure that we are keeping people here. But if you use that argument to say that we need to keep people here because of a low tax state or all these other reasons, and that we hear data, surveys, and even anecdotes from doctors, young physicians, young OBGYNs in residency, just deciding to come here, I don't think they're going to stay here. I think once they have their practice here at UNMC or Creighton or whatever other institution they go to, they're going to leave to practice in a place where they are seen as physicians and we are trusting their judgment to do right by their patients. And it's not just physicians. I will be passing out information and surveys on the surveys done to show that general population of Americans are making decisions on where they're starting to live based on where they have abortion care. We already took so long to get Medicaid expansion. We have many things that we still haven't done to then make sure it's easier for young women and families to be successful in their early stages of life. Doing something like this is sending a message to every single young professional, to people in the medical community, to people that we're trying to stay and keep here to grow the good life. And we are telling them that we don't want you. This is not something that we should be doing to grow our economy. And it's definitely not something we should be doing if we believe in the rights of Nebraskans and their privacy. Colleagues, I'll continue to get on the mic to talk about the economic impact, that's how this is going to affect our state, the economic impact, and we're talking about our healthcare sector and the individuals that are protecting our lives in every single other sector of our lives.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to try to maybe shift gears here a little bit, hopefully not get too philosophical. But I think sometimes in a discussion like this, I'm hoping we can maybe have some sort of a debate. I know a lot of people voice their opinions and their thoughts on the matter and relative research and, topics of interest. But I think just in maybe the name of some kind of form of discussion making, I wonder if maybe Senator Kavanaugh would yield to a question. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
I don't mean this to be too much of a personal question, and it shouldn't be, because it's more just kind of getting your opinion on basically the topic that we're discussing. But when do you think, at what time of gestation is it not appropriate to get an abortion?
When do I think it's not appropriate to get an abortion?
Yeah, I'm trying to gauge the people that we're having a discussion with and when I want to debate with. And so to find out kind of maybe where you're coming from a little bit is, do you think it's okay for someone who is a female who's 38 weeks pregnant to get an abortion?
Well, I don't know what the circumstances would be around somebody at 38 weeks that would be seeking an abortion. So I don't think that it's fair or accurate for me to place a value judgment on that decision. And I don't know where someone would receive that type of care unless it was because it was life-threatening. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, because I would need to know what the circumstances are to actually answer the question. And
Okay.
even then, it would be placing a value judgment on a situation that I'm not familiar with.
Sure. In some instances, there are states where they, I think you can have an abortion up to 40 weeks.
Where is that?
From like Minnesota. Is New York there too? I'm unfamiliar with New York.
I'm not aware of anywhere that you can receive an abortion for a live birth.
A live birth?
Well, at 40 weeks, if you were aborting a baby out of your vagina or womb, it would be live.
Yeah,
So that
let's
would be
just say
murder.
she's still pregnant with a child at like 38 weeks or 36 weeks or 39 weeks.
If it's a viable birth,
If it's a baby that's in there, and she economically cannot take care of the child, and then she decides, I don't want to put this child in poverty, or for whatever reasons that they might find, do you think it's okay for her to get an abortion?
I don't think it's okay to terminate a live birth.
You're saying a baby after they're born.
Yes.
I'm saying a baby before they're born.
I don't understand the medical mechanism in which you believe that this is happening.
This is a little bit more of a philosophical kind of idea about where you're coming from. I'm trying to rationalize
Well,
people's arguments here. And so
where
and you make,
I'm coming from is that every individual, every pregnancy, every birth is singular.
yeah, I just gave you a hypothetical, right?
Sure.
And so it should be kind of a yes or no question if you believe it is, a female should get an abortion at that time or not.
I don't think that I think that it's kind of a straw man's argument because it's not real. So I don't want to place a judgment on a medical situation that isn't even a real situation. And I don't want to put constraints on something that I'm not familiar with, and I don't feel it's appropriate for me to state a medical opinion about something that isn't real, and I don't understand the mechanisms of how it would become real.
I think it's I'm giving you a hypothetical to get an idea of where you're coming from. For me, I don't think it's appropriate, right? I think it's a human life that's in there, and from maybe just your lack of response, I would assume you would feel that it's okay for someone at 38 weeks or maybe even 40 weeks before they're born to terminate a pregnancy.
No, I would not say that that's accurate. I wouldn't say.
So you're saying no?
I'm saying that I don't think that's a real thing.
Nobody wants to have to terminate a pregnancy at 38 weeks?
I'm not saying that whether they want to or not. I'm saying whether they can or not is not real.
Okay.
And in Minnesota, I was just passed a note is 24 to 26 weeks. Most states' viability, like if the baby can live outside of the womb independently, is when it is no longer acceptable. And I think viability is a really important conversation. And that I think it's really hard to say that it's I personally would not feel it's appropriate. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Wishart, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the motion to indefinitely postpone LB 626 and in strong opposition to LB 626. Colleagues, I find this legislation, similar to last year's legislation, to be an incredibly cynical view of women. If I were to poll this entire room and ask each one of you who, when you were growing up, was responsible for making sure you went to the doctor, I guarantee the majority of people in this room would say their mothers. Over 90% of single parents in this world are women. We chose to stay with children. And yet, of all the pieces of legislation we want to do this year, and of all the people we want to strip freedoms from, it is pregnant women. How cynical. I am shocked that the media has not dug further into the ramifications of this legislation. Last year, we debated a bill that would have made in vitro fertilization illegal. And all of us who got up here and debated that were told we were being hysterical. Come to find out, after we, by one vote, didn't pass that bill, from those who supported it, acknowledged, yes, it would. Yes, it would. We were one vote short, colleagues, last year of passing a bill that would have made in vitro fertilization illegal in our state. In the rush to get a piece of legislation through so we can claim to be, the most at something in this state, we threatened the ability of a lot of my female friends to get pregnant. And we're doing that again today. This bill, when you dig into it, colleagues, exposes not just doctors, but it potentially exposes women to criminal penalties at 6 weeks, not for abortion, but for all of the extraneous other things that a prosecutor could go after a woman for. For example, a young girl gets pregnant by her stepdad, and she covers it up, or she says it wasn't him. She potentially could be charged for the act of covering that up. And this isn't some just potential. This is happening under current law today in Norfolk. There is a case today of a woman after 20 weeks who is facing potential felony charges. And now we're changing that to 6 weeks. I know a lot of people have talked today
1
about
minute.
regrets that people will have. But a life without regret is a life without choice. And I don't think a lot of people in this room would be willing to give up their ability to have choice over very important decisions for their lives and their body and their autonomy and their freedom just to not have regrets. And there are so many other things, colleagues, that we could be doing to make the choice easier for people to say yes to having that child. Why don't we do that? Why do we immediately go to just removing somebody's choice and exposing them potentially to criminal penalties in doing that? Thank you.
Senator McKinney, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise opposed to LB 626, and I support the motion to indefinitely postpone. Restricting access to health care and abortion impacts all birthing people across the nation, but it has the starkest impact on Black birthing folks and people of color who face high risk of health complications related to pregnancy and birth. I'm not religious. I believe there is a higher power, but I don't base my policy decisions on my beliefs of whatever I believe in a sense of either I'm religious or spiritual or whatever, and especially one that was used to enslave my ancestors. And if we're gonna say people are racist, let's call out all races. The founding fathers were racist. So if we're gonna stop celebrating races, let's stop celebrating races across the board. And this underlying assumption that Black women lack a critical thinking skills to avoid falling into the pitfalls of murdering Black babies is wow. Well, there isn't, from my knowledge, any Planned Parenthoods in North Omaha, so that fact really isn't a fact, especially in the majority Black community in our state. Anti-choice activists believe that any contraceptives to limit the conception of Black infants is an act of genocide. When did bodily autonomy and choice become an act of genocide? By defining abortion as genocide, anti-abortion activists assert full personhood of any and all Black fetuses. Thus, abortion is an act of killing a member of the Black race. To prove genocide, you would have to prove intent to destroy the member of the race. This discussion of intent seemingly sidesteps Black women by erasing their decision-making capabilities entirely. The blame is placed on the government, the doctors, and the clinics instead. The myth of abortion as Black genocide depends on denying Black women of their humanity and their agency to make medical decisions regarding their reproduction. Proponents of this myth sexualize racism by centering Black women and their wombs as a site of genocide without taking into account actions of any male partners, mentally separating a Black woman from the fetus in her uterus. Many old civil rights leaders place fetuses on the same moral pedestal as enslaved humans, placing the Black woman in the same position as slaves and plantation owners, and it's unfair, unjust, and an inhumane standing. And the history of Black women and their reproduction in America is very complicated. Enslaved Black women would bring another child into bondage through birth. Often the ability to reproduce made them more valuable. Some slave owners would practice slave breeding, a forcible way to increase the slave master's population, thus contributing to the continued sexual exploitation of Black women. Some enslaved Black women chose to take their reproduction futures into their own hands through medicines and other methods, including drinking concoctions. By using these methods, Black women attempted to control their own reproductive futures, regardless of the slave owner's wishes. Is this the future we're heading towards? And a lot of people say that they're pro-life. And for me, if you're going to be pro-life, you need to be anti-death penalty as well. We shouldn't have a death penalty in the state of Nebraska if we're the pro-life state of America. That is a direct contradiction. In the Bible, it does say thou shalt not kill. So if we're going to base our policy decisions on the Bible and what it says, we should be banning the death penalty this year as well. Thank you.
Senator Kauth, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the heartbeat bill and in opposition to the IPP motion. I've been listening to today's argument, and I have a few comments. Senator Raybold, when you talk about least of these, I am very sure that the least of these would be that baby that is growing and developing safely tucked inside his mother's womb. That baby has no defense, only its mother to protect him or her. I also have had many emails and letters. They're running more in support of the heartbeat bill than against. I've talked with doctors, and I've had doctors on both sides. LB 626 has been wrapped up in discussion of women's health, but what about the baby's health? Those babies are most at risk. They are at risk of being scraped out of their mother's womb and discarded. The heartbeat bill is about protecting the baby who has no voice. That baby with a completely unique DNA, he or she is their own person, and we are obligated to protect the least of these. And if people are making decisions about where to live based on these laws, I would like to offer a warm welcome and invitation to citizens from Minnesota, Colorado, New York, and California who have recently passed laws allowing abortion up to birth. I really, really hope that we can get this law passed. And I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Ben Hansen so you can continue asking Senator Kavanaugh these questions.
Senator Hansen, 3 minutes, 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, I might hold off on Senator Kavanaugh for a second. I actually wanted to ask, before I asked Senator Frederickson a question, because he brought up an interesting point before when he got on the microphone. I do need to correct also New Mexico, Alaska, New Jersey, and Vermont also do not have any restrictions on abortion. Minnesota also recently passed a very broad abortion rights law. So there are certain states that do allow abortion up to 40 weeks, it sounds like, for varying circumstances. But Senator Frederickson brought up a point about the man's role, I think, in this discussion. And I thought that's something sometimes we maybe don't talk a whole lot about. And so if he would yield to a question, please.
Senator Frederickson, will you yield?
Yes.
As always, I do appreciate your discussion and your thoughtfulness on topics like this. What do you feel a man's right is, or the father's right is, in the pregnancy of a child? So if the mother wants to abort the baby at whatever point of gestation, 20 weeks, and the man, say they're married or not married, wants to keep the baby and adamantly wants to take care of the baby, what rights do you think the father should have in that instance?
I think you're asking, I think, a very, important question, which is, and I think what you're highlighting here is something that I don't see a lot of in this debate, which is the nuance of each and every case. And I think bills like LB 626 totally skim over that nuance. And it says this is not a decision up to the individual couple, up to the individual circumstance, up to the individual context. What this bill does is it says statewide, we are making this decision for anyone, for any family, for any man, woman, whoever, who might be in the situation. We as the government are telling you what your options are. We're not saying you have the individual freedom to decide on this. We're not saying you have the ability to have this conversation. We're saying we're taking that freedom and that decision away from you, and we're putting it in the context of this law. So I can't speak to what an individual case is because I haven't walked in everyone's shoes. But what I do believe is that we as a state should not be doing a blanket law that tells people how to live their lives.
Okay. I appreciate your opinion, and I appreciate you for sharing it. So I kind of want to get your perspective, especially since you brought that up earlier.
Yep, thank you.
If I could, would Senator Raybold yield to a question, please?
Senator Raybold, will you yield?
Yes.
One other, again, kind of philosophical question I kind of wanted to ask you is, it seems like the underlying, I think, opinion of pro-choice advocates is that it is a woman's right to choose based on bodily autonomy, based on it's her body and it's her right to do what she wants with her body. So in that context, if a woman is pregnant...
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Decay, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in full support of LB 626 today. This is a tough topic to discuss and to debate. As I sit here listening today, I believe the issue at hand ultimately boils down to when a human life begins and creates a distinct individual person. We could spend hours debating when a human life begins, but at some point, a determination needs to be drawn. For myself, abortion is not merely a medical procedure. It is the termination of a new human life. In 2021, approximately 2,360 abortions were reported to the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. Only 81 abortions were performed by the reason of maternal health and 5 due to emergency situation. There were also 16 cases of sexual assault and 0 cases of incest. Of the remainder, a majority of the abortions are what I would classify as elective in nature. About 200,000 abortions have been performed in Nebraska in the last 50 years. That is approximately 250 lives that have been terminated prematurely. So what rights should the unborn have? Do they deserve a chance at life? Is life simply disposable? In our Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, it is said that the state shall not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What have the unborn done to have their right of life revoked? The unborn are the only segment of our culture whose value truly depends on whether someone wants them or not. The unborn cannot defend themselves or speak out. I believe that there is not one person here that would actually want to cause pain to a baby. I also believe that there is not one person here who believes that terminating an innocent life is acceptable. LB 626 would give a choice to those who cannot defend themselves and grant more children a chance to live a long and fruitful life. I would urge the body to advance LB 626 to select file, and I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Albright. Thank you.
2 minutes, 20 seconds, Senator Albright.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to, because we're getting close to lunch, just run real quick through some of the friendliest pro-life laws in the United States. I know it's hard for people to believe that, but LB 626 has no criminal penalties. Every other state with pro-life laws has criminal penalties for abortions. LB 6 gives no right to sue doctors who perform unlawful abortions. Allowing a right to sue is common in abortion laws in other states. LB 626 definition of reasonable medical judgment is broader and provides a bigger safe harbor for the judgment of physicians than any pro-life law in the United States. Most states and our own 20-week fetal pain law, which has worked well for 13 years, says that reasonable medical judgment means a judgment that a medical emergency exists that would be made by a physician knowledgeable about the case and the treatment possibilities. LB 626 is more generous to doctors. It says that reasonable medical judgment means a judgment that a medical emergency exists that could be made by a physician knowledgeable about the case and the treatment possibilities. The substitution of one word, could, instead of would,
1 minute,
matters. Translation of this comparison is that a doctor is free to exercise his medical judgment that a medical emergency exists and proceed to perform an abortion. and his medical judgment will be deferred to by the law unless no reasonably prudent physician knowledgeable about the case could have come to the same conclusion. LB 626 gives physicians accused of bad conduct a right to evaluation by their medical peers. Every other state puts the doctor in front of a judge and jury when accused of performing unlawful abortions. Colleagues, I understand that there's a lot of frustration over whether this should be in law or not on this floor today, but babies with beating hearts, they deserve to be protected. And when we have our oath of office to protect, those are the very people that they're talking about. The heartbeat of a baby has to
Time,
be.
Senator.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, some items. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 276, 276A, 296, 298, 298A, and 775 as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. New LR from Senator Day. That'll be laid over. Notice that the Appropriations Committee will have an executive session at 12:30 in room 1307, Appropriations 12:30, 1307. Finally, Mr. President, a priority motion. Senator John Kavanaugh moved to recess the body until 1 o'clock.
Senators, you've heard the motion to recess until 1 p.m. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The next three speakers, when we return at 1 o'clock, will be Senators Holdcroft, Lippincott, Dorn, followed by others. We are in recess.